Hey guys, it's Inverse here with a quick how to set up your monk, or at least how I set up my monk. You can see here my lovely character. And I'm just going to go through a quick rundown of my talents, how I choose to reforge, and the way I gem and enchants and such like that. So that you all can get an idea of how I've gotten to where I am, which currently, as you can see, is not amazing. Because we've been lazy, but we should be getting 2200 this week. There we are, 2117. Not so bad considering our seasonal stats are 44 and 16, only 60 games played. So, not doing terribly, but at the same time, could do better, hope to do better, and I'll just give you a quick rundown now. Alright, so we'll start with talents. Tier 1, you may think you have some options here, but in general, I find that Tiger's Lust is the best choice. It gives you a lot of options, especially if you're playing with a Shadow Priest or something that could benefit a lot from Sprint. The main benefit, of course, being that you can see it clears roots and immobilizing effects, and the movement speed is always nice. I happen to play with the Paladin, so that movement speed buff combined with freedom, not necessarily just instead of freedom, is actually very strong on our Shadow Priest to allow him to get fears on healers. But it does give you that group utility over the other two options. For Tier 2, most people that I have seen use Chi Wave, and the reason is because it is the strongest heal in this line. And it's just straight up, it does the most healing, has the most potential for healing, and it's extremely effective when your enemies are in melee range. To use this, I definitely have a macro set up for myself as well as my allies, so I can target them with it without having to switch. It's really nice, again, when, say, a healer is getting trained by melee and you have no peels left. You can't stun for him, you can't give him Tiger's Lust. There's just no other things that you can do for him except for heal him. So it's always nice to have that. It's not very expensive, and the biggest downside is the travel time, but as you can see, it has a 40-yard range, so it is very, I don't know, fire and forget. You don't have to do a whole lot. You can keep doing your DPS or whatever it is you're doing without knowing that you've done all you can. Third tier, there's a little bit of debate, especially coming up with the patch 5.1. If the Ascension change goes through and 15% energy regen becomes passive, you may want to go with Ascension. But right now, it does appear that Chi Brew is the only logical choice. Well, it's not the only logical choice, but for me, it's my preferred choice. As you can see, it's not my bars. I don't know why. Must have been for PvE. A lot of people use Power Strikes in PvE. You can use this as well in PvP if you're not comfortable having another cooldown or button to press. It's going to give you the most chi for your energy in the long term, so it's definitely the best one for sustained DPS. Again, the reason I prefer Chi Brew over Power Strikes and Ascension is that both of these require you to be in melee range to generate Chi, since Jab is your only Chi generator outside of Crackling Jade Lightning, which is kind of garbage, and Expel Harm, which is on a 15-second cooldown. This gives you reliable off the global cooldown, most importantly, Chi generation, which definitely does help your burst. You can't argue that it doesn't help your burst. You can chain more blackout kicks together or do a Fist of Fury when you have no Chi. But more importantly, and the main reason I like it, is that Touch of Karma requires 2 Chi, and you're not always in melee range to be able to generate that Chi when you need it. And sometimes you don't have the luxury of another global cooldown either. Like, you're just coming out of a shockwave, you have no Chi, Warrior's running Recklessness on you, you really need to get that Touch of Karma out. And so this has kind of saved my ass more times than I can think of. That's just why I prefer Chi Brew. Again, your mileage may vary, so choose what you will. Third tier, again, there's a little bit of a debate. You have options, and I would say it mainly depends on what kind of comp you play. You're going to find that leg sweep, if you know how to use it and you're careful with how you use it, I feel anyway, you get the most mileage out of this skill. You can chain stuns with it and Fist of Fury, and then follow that up with a Silence, or it just gives you another AoE stun to peel, and it's a long AoE stun as well. Really good for swaps, really good for sustained control. great against melee cleaves, decent against casters, maybe not the best, but again, main use is for swapping. Really, it's a lot easier to land this if your target's already slowed, so don't just try and run up to an unslowed target or try and chase down a Feral Druid and land this without him already being controlled in some other way. You have to be careful. So often it's good to use it if you're on a switch again after you've used the Flying Serpent kick slow, so you can be sure that you're not going to get screwed over by lag, because the radius, as you can see, is 5 yards. Very touchy to use. Charging Oxwave is a little bit easier to use, but it is a fire and forget spell, a lot like Spinning Fire Blossom unglyphed. Shoots in a straight line, hits the first thing in its path. So it can be dodged at long range, but it does give you a long range control option for CC chains on healers. Deadly Reach, I'm split on. I think Deadly Reach would be good in very limited situations, very limited comps, and only in the situation where your comp is just running too many goddamn stuns. Most likely something with a rogue, or I can't really think of anything else that would really be hard on stuns. Maybe a warrior. You could reason using Deadly Reach over the other two, but only if your stuns are just DRing all over the place. Like, is it really worth it to use this skill? The main drawback of it is that 9 times out of 10 you're going to hit them with paralysis from the front at 20 yards away, because they're going to be facing you to control you or heal their ally or whatever. So the main drawback to this skill is that you're only going to hit them for the 4-second, the half duration paralysis 9 times out of 10. Because in order to reliably land that 8-second one, you're more or less going to have to be in melee range with the target and make sure you can get behind them. Like, you're going to have to do it out of a stun. You're going to have to do it out of another CC to guarantee that full 8 seconds. So this skill is not exactly very useful in PvP. PvE obviously is probably a little different. Third tier, your options are between Dampen Harm and Diffuse Magic. You don't really have any other options for PvP. This really isn't very good for PvP. I think you can see why. It's just not enough healing, and the turtle cooldown's too high. It's good sustained healing, but not really for PvP. Now, your options between Diffuse and Dampen Harm, you should honestly be using both of them, and you should use them both in different situations. Against a team with a caster, where the caster is doing majority of the burst, say a mage team, definitely mage teams, you want Diffuse Magic. Works well against Shadow Priest teams as well. You can use it to swap the diffuse from the you can use it to use the diffuse rather and diffuse the Frost Bomb or the Shadow Priest dots or the Warlock dots back onto the Shadow Priest or Warlock, and use those dots to help with your own burst. Dampen Harm, exclusively used against cleave teams, especially Kitty Cleave. You'll see there's really no reason to use Diffuse Magic. They're not going to do anything to you that would really warrant that. So, with the exception of possibly Roots, but Roots aren't going to stick on a Feral Druid anyway, so Dampen Harm is really the way to go. It's really strong against Recklessness, especially against Recklessness. It's almost what I can say is our most direct counter, other than, of course, Touch of Karma, to huge cooldown popping. For warriors and Feral Druids especially, just something that does physical damage. Otherwise, you're better off with the 90% flat magic damage reduction for 6 seconds, in my opinion. This does last longer. It's the next 3 attacks within 45 seconds, so if they choose not to burst you right away with their cooldowns, then you do have a little extra time where they can't burst you, because any huge attack is going to get cut in half. Now, third wave, you don't have too many options, and Zuyan really is it's a good cooldown for Windwalkers. It's like a sustained pressure, but he does have drawbacks, and that's the only reason you could justify not taking him in this tree, is if you're worried about him breaking CC, especially against melee cleaves, and you can almost guarantee you have to be very careful, because he will break a CC or two in your lifetime. You can guarantee that. But you have to, this is where focus macros come in handy, because he will attack your target, and he will stay near your target. So when you go to CC something else, as long as you don't target it, he won't switch. And it does take him a few seconds to register and switch. So you can tab and then tab back real quick, and maybe he won't switch, but you're playing with fire there. So that's where focus macros come in handy. So you can CC something on your focus that while Zuyin is off, say on a cleave, and you flying serpent kick over to the healer, focus paralysis him, and you won't have to worry about Zuyin coming over and breaking that CC. If you are worried about not being able to CC cleave teams outside of your stuns, this is a bad cooldown for you. And if the enemy healers are intelligent and they run into him, so that he does apply the 5-second dot, the dot does a decent amount of damage. You can see by the tooltip, it does a decent amount of damage, and it's based off of your AP, but you can see that I am in PvE gear right now anyway, wearing a warglaive, so we'll see what the tooltip actually says when I get into my PvP gear. Should be significantly less, yeah, 69, 165, since I don't have quite as much AP in my PvP gear. And that's again reduced by resilience and PvP power, whatever. It does last a long time, it is a decent amount of damage, and it is not affected by armor, so he's a solid cooldown to use for sustained pressure during those burst phases. Rushing Jade Winds, really not that useful. I mean, it doesn't hit that hard. It is really for an AoE cooldown. I don't suggest using it. Chi Torpedo is your only other option, and it's really just a good kiting cooldown. You roll away anyway, and it's really, these are just if you don't want to use Zuyin ever because you're worried about him breaking CC or whatever reason.